Releasing Trauma is sponsored by the Global Association for Trauma Recovery. The Global Association for Trauma Recovery is a social impact organization serving as a resource for survivors and their families, dedicated to facilitating change by spreading trauma-related awareness and thus creating a more trauma-informed world. Learn more at gaftr.org. Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. With me today is PJ Lewis, and we're going to be talking about a modality called DBT therapy and how it can help with anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, and all that kind of stuff. So PJ, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, this is going to be a great topic. I love talking about different modalities because there's so many different ones out there, and it's healing from trauma is not a cookie cutter thing. So
Nice.
I love introducing new modalities to my audience. But before we do that, can you tell us a little bit about your backstory?
Well, my lovely wife and I have been together for 18 years, and we have 4 lovely children. And when I'm not doing family things, then, I'm a therapist, but it's not how I started out. I did my undergraduate degree in kinesiology and was going into the sciences. And then one thing led to another, and was challenged to consider becoming a therapist. And with, at the time, 2 kids under 2, that seemed like a daunting undertaking to go back to school and get a
For
graduate
real.
degree and all the rest of it. And but now looking back, no regrets. I totally feel at home where I am in this field.
Wow. That's kudos to you for going back to school with 2 kids underage too, because I'm a mom of 4, and I am just now looking at going back to school to finish my degree and go for my master's. And I waited until they were all pretty much all grown up. My youngest is almost 18. So there's no way I could have done it when they were younger. That's for sure.
No way I could have done it alone either. Lots of support from family and friends. Otherwise, I would have been drowning.
Exactly. So, let's go ahead and talk about DBT therapy. Tell us a little bit about what that means and what it is and how it works. And
Sure, yeah. So DBT is a modality. It stands for dialectical behavior therapy, and really, DBT is about finding an effective way to help people who have a lot of complex things going on all at the same time. Usually at the heart of it, there's a lot of emotional dysregulation, ups and downs, being on a roller coaster, feeling things really intensely, so much so that it can be so overwhelming. And those emotional ups and downs can find us doing really desperate things to make that kind of pain and suffering stop. And so people often find themselves thinking about or acting on urges for suicide, or engaging in self-harming behaviors, or other impulsive things to bring themselves some relief to that aloneness that they feel in all of those ups and downs. And so DBT is really a way to wrap around people who have a number of those things going on all at the same time, with individual therapy, with group skills training, and with coaching outside of therapy, and with a team of therapists, really to help people build a life worth living.
so is this is something that people can't really learn and do on their own. They need to have a therapist or somebody certified in DBT to work with them, right?
Yeah, DBT therapists have a lot of specialized training in DBT and how to work effectively with our clients. And so, yeah, it's not really a self-help approach, but it really is about a team. Not only the therapist and the skills trainers working as a team, but also coming alongside the client to really forge it's a real relationship between equals. And how do we work together to help you find your life worth living?
Gotcha. How is it? How does it differ and compare to, say, cognitive behavioral therapy?
Yeah, great question. Cognitive behavioral therapy is fantastic. I have a lot of training in that too, and it's very effective for a number of things. But in my experience, CBT really focuses on more one thing at a time or a few things at a time, and really focuses on, our how our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are interconnected, and really tries to attack it largely from the point of view of changing our thinking. And then that will affect how we're feeling and will affect what we're doing. DBT would look a little bit more broadly at, any one of those things could be a starting point, including that dimension of our feelings, because what we know about how our brains work is that when they're really flooded with stress, with trauma, with everything else that could go on in someone's life, sometimes thinking about different strategies and thinking differently just isn't accessible. It really is about doing other things with our behavior or even to change our affect state so that we can start to get out of those really extreme ups and downs that are going on. So there's a number of skills and strategies that we look at to try and, have many different approaches to come at bringing some relief to the amount of suffering we're experiencing.
Understandable. I know that, you know, yeah, being a trauma survivor myself and dealing with the mood swings and disorders and all that good stuff that comes along with it.
Mhm.
Yeah, there are those times where, trying to change your thought strategy and thought patterns is impossible. You're lucky to be able to string a sentence together sometimes.
Yeah,
Let
exactly.
alone try and recreate neural pathways and all that kind of good stuff.
Exactly, yes.
So, what are some things that we can do? I mean, you know, to cope with um, the mental thoughts, the mental disorders, the suicidal thoughts, the addictive behaviors. Um, other than DBT, of course, what are some other things that our listeners could do, maybe on their own?
Right. Yeah, I think that one of the things that we rely heavily on in DBT, but it goes beyond DBT, is there are a number of skills and strategies that we need, and they kind of have a range or fall into a spectrum. And if we are really honest with ourselves, a lot of us, all of us, we have the ability to do effective things and to really tap into our own resources. And so, even though DBT might call a skill or a strategy a particular thing, people are often doing a lot of these good things already. But adding a little bit of intentionality or practicing it more mindfully can really help to bring a lot of relief so that we're being less driven by our mood and our circumstances and being a little bit more on top of finding some space in between what's going on and how we're responding to it in order to try and respond with our wisdom that we have inside of us. In DBT, we call that our wise mind. And we find our wise mind really by practicing mindfulness. And yes, sometimes in a meditative, reflective kind of way, but also in a doing kind of way. How can I be fully present to what I'm doing right here, right now, in the moment, without being flooded by everything in the past or worrying about everything that's coming in the future? And so, really, at the heart, it's finding that foundation of mindfulness to then be able to do things like tolerate distress and regulate our emotions or manage our important relationships.
Gotcha. Okay. And how does this work with? Mindfulness is super important.
Yeah.
Um, Being present in the moment, not living in the past, not focused on the future. Because that's all we have is right now.
Mhm.
But that's hard. That's
Oh,
really hard to stay out of our past. Let me tell you. but part of our past is handed down to us, intergenerational trauma. So, how does this work with breaking that cycle?
Oh yeah. And that I think is one of the key things that both experience and the research shows us is that, the even though DBT was originally in its original formulation really targeted at working with folks who meet criteria for borderline personality disorder, we know that, the theory and the practice since then has really been broadened to work with a much wider audience, like I described earlier with those emotional ups and downs. But what we know is that people who've experienced that level of distress in their life, there's a really high overlap between folks who are, experiencing those types of symptoms in their life and folks who've experienced trauma or traumatic incidents either in their own life or intergenerationally. And so much so that, more than half of our clients who are coming to us for DBT have also experienced trauma. And so one of the things that we do is, even though it's really hard to be in the present because, our past, either intergenerationally or our own past, can almost be like a black hole, a vortex sucking us out of the present moment and bringing us into trauma time. And one of the things that we do there is, if a lot of times, yes, breathing exercises are fantastic. And if they work, they're great. And, practicing meditative mindfulness is fantastic. And if it works, it's great. But sometimes we really have to work with the body. And how do I just get my body, my senses back here into the here and now of this present moment? And sometimes in DBT, we even just talk about using our senses to kind of come right back into the moment. What can I see? What can I hear, taste, touch, feel in order to bring me back into the here and now?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that. I know there's an exercise out there. It's like 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, or something like that. But it relies on the senses and totally brings you back into the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it works great, especially for anxiety and stress, panic attacks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and in DBT, we kind of focus on, there's different skills and strategies for different situations that we're in. Sometimes, if we're truly in a crisis, sometimes it's not about solving the problem, because sometimes the problem can't be solved or it can't be solved right now. Sometimes it's about getting through a problem and buying ourselves some time without making things worse. How do I just get into the next moment and give myself a little bit of time so that another skill or another strategy can help? And sometimes, in DBT, we call those our distress tolerant strategies. And, whether that's using our senses to soothe or whether that's doing something with a lot of science behind it, like, trying to, calm our body through, a paced breathing exercise where we're really using a long exhale that's longer than our inhale to deoxygenate our blood and regulate our heart rate, or whether we're using, something as simple and everyday as, if I cool down the nerve endings in my face with cold water, that's going to pull a parasympathetic nervous response. It's going to calm me and I'm going to stop, at least for a few moments. I'm going to slow down all of those stress hormones coursing through my veins to give myself a little bit of time to then do something else to continue that process of coming back to the present.
Right. I want to switch gears just a little bit. I want to talk, about suicide and suicidal tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to talk in September, for Suicide Awareness Month, but that's okay because I think every month should be Awareness Month for everything. So, I want to talk about this because it's so important. Trauma survivors, we just want to stop the pain. And sometimes that pain is just so much that the only way we can think of to stop it is just to end it.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean we want to die. It just means we want the pain to stop.
Mm-hmm.
So number one, how can somebody recognize the signs of suicidal ideation?
Yeah, it's such a good question because you're right. It's suicide often isn't the problem. It's a potential solution to a
Yeah.
problem. And when if we're wondering if somebody is experiencing suicidal ideation or being tempted to act on the urge for suicide, there's no one perfect way to know, but there are things we can look for. But at the heart of it, the only way to really know if somebody's feeling suicidal is to ask them. And one of the biggest myths out there is that talking about suicide is going to make people feel more suicidal. And we
Right.
just know there's absolutely no evidence for that. In fact, it's the opposite. Most people who can have a trusting, honest, open, non-judgmental conversation with another caring person often feel relieved that it's safe to let somebody know that
Mhm.
these types of things are going on for me on the inside.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I did volunteer work for the crisis text line. And, one of the questions that we always have to ask every person that texts in is, do you have any thoughts of suicide? Do you have any thoughts of harming yourself? Something, do you
Mm.
want to die? Something along those lines.
Yeah,
And yeah, at first I was like, I don't want to ask these people this question.
right.
What kind of a question is that? But you'd be surprised how many people would reach out for one issue, and it really boiled down to, yeah, they are having suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
And then we can go from there and work out, get them calmed down and um, create some kind of a plan for them to move forward. But um,
Mhm.
yeah, just coming right out and asking somebody that you fear might be having those thoughts isn't going to push them into doing it. you know
No, if anything, quite the opposite.
yeah,
We let them know that, hey, you cared enough to ask.
exactly. And what age range do you see um it has the highest suicide rate? Is it teens?
Well, I mean, we do know that, both I'm calling in from Canada here, and in Canada, the number two cause of death amongst adolescents in our country is suicide.
Yeah.
And which is quite, a significant and sobering thing. And so we do certainly a lot of work with adolescents, but also people across the age range as well, because
Yeah.
those moments of intense suffering and being feeling so alone in it that suicide might feel like the only way out, like, can happen across the age span. But yes, we do certainly see a lot of youth struggling.
Right. It's like just trauma in general. It doesn't have a predisposition to age, race, gender, any of that stuff. It just happens.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, suicidal thoughts and tendencies are kind of the same way. Um, you know,
Yeah.
it's not a predisposed thing that's going to just target teenagers or target one group over another.
Yeah, and one thing that we know puts people at much more risk is feeling that they're alone in it, and people's sense of how alone that they feel can deeply be impacted by how many adverse experiences and traumatic events have been in their life. We know that the research around adverse childhood experiences shows us that, people, the more adversity that we've faced and the more unsupported we've been through that adversity, the more we are likely to feel alone in that and to be at risk for all kinds of concerns, including suicide.
Oh, absolutely. And, it has me thinking about a show. I was watching a crime show last night. I love crime TV. But I was watching a show last night, and, a girl was telling her story um, about her and her sister growing up with a very horrible father, to putting it mildly. And at one point he started molesting them. Well, she didn't say anything to her sister because she thought if I keep it quiet, if I just let him, do it to me, he'll leave her alone. Right. Sister did the exact same thing. If I don't say anything, if I don't make any fuss, I don't tell anybody, he'll leave my sister alone.
Yeah.
But it got to the point where she felt that her only way out was suicide. Mm-hmm. That it was the only way to get it to stop, and luckily that's not the case. And what ultimately ended up happening is that she finally broke down and told somebody.
Yeah.
And that's when, it was able to stop, was when she finally told somebody and they were pulled from the house and he was arrested. My point in telling all this is that, number one, you're not alone. She thought she was alone. Her sister thought she was alone. And really, they were going through this together.
Yeah.
And number two is it is so crucial to speak out in order to get the help that you need. We're not mind readers. Yeah. We can't tell if you're hurting, you're in pain, you're wanting to end it all, or, you're cutting or self-harming, whatever you're doing. We don't know. So, you've got to reach out and talk to people. But yeah, that's my biggest mantra is you're not alone, because you're absolutely not. There's so many people going through, similar types of traumas as others.
Yeah, absolutely. And having, being able to either speak out and ask for help, or have somebody in your life, take that risk to ask that scary question, how are you? Are you okay? Are you thinking of suicide? If that way we can find a way to meet in the middle somewhere and help people feel less alone in all of this.
Yeah, and ask probing questions. Most of the time, if you ask a trauma survivor, how are you? They're going to say, oh, I'm fine. I'm hanging in there. So, really ask those questions, and come from a place of love and support. And eventually they'll open up to you, hopefully.
Totally. And I think one of the other key elements too is when we are asking somebody if they're feeling suicidal, or if they are engaging in self-harming behaviors, maybe without the intent of suicide, is to not only approach that with non-judgment and openness, but also to avoid the urge to too quickly go to, oh, but you're not going to do that, or why would you do that? It's to pause even for a moment to be with them in that pain. We don't want to encourage or validate, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because we don't want to encourage somebody to act on that urge. But what we can do is say, wow, you must be in a lot of pain. You must be really suffering if that's, the solution that you're looking at right now. If we can be in with them just for a moment or two in that, we have an acceptance of where they're at right now, and then we can move towards the change of helping them connect to their reasons for living, because and you are still alive, you are still here, we are having this conversation, so what's keeping you connected to life right now, and how can we breathe some life into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I have to admit, I am guilty of, in my past, thinking of people who committed suicide or attempted suicide as cowards, looking for a cop out, taking the easy way out, because I didn't know any better.
Yeah,
I didn't know back then that, people who hit that point, it's not that they're looking for the easy way out. They're just in so much pain. They're desperate for a way to stop the pain.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely, don't come at people with a place of judgment, or with a mindset of judgment, or you're just taking the coward's way out. Because that's really not it.
No, far from it. Usually it's even coming from a place of, man, like, I've tried everything and nothing else has worked.
Yeah.
And really kind of pausing with that and go like, wow, no wonder you feel so desperate right now. Like, you've worked really hard and not gotten the relief you've been looking for, and, we can also do some more things to help you to feel better if you're up for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't tell you how many stories I've read of suicide survivors who, people who've jumped off the Golden Gate, and
Mhm.
the minute they let go of the railing, they immediately regret their decision,
Yeah.
or swallowing the pills or whatever it is that they've done. They immediately regretted their decision, and they're so grateful for another chance at life.
Hmm. Absolutely, yeah. And I think one thing that we also know is that, if we know somebody who's died by suicide, that also puts us at a higher risk. But if we look at that from the other angle, a person's choice to not end their own life is also a choice to help other people around them stay more safe.
Yeah,
Because, right? And so sometimes I know I've had many clients I've worked with that's even been something that, what, like maybe I don't have a lot of reasons for living right now, but I'm willing to stay alive, even if it's only to help that other person that I care about, because I'd be putting them at more risk if I were to exit this life in this way.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. PJ, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me, or talking to us today about, not only the DBT, but just this incredibly sensitive topic of suicide. And I think it's important that we get out there that it's okay to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been an honor to be here. Thanks for so much for having me on the show.
Oh, I've enjoyed it. So, how can our listeners find you?
The easiest way is to just come to our website, which is just dbtfv.com. And my all of our contact information for all of our socials is listed on the site.
Great. And you just started a new podcast, is that correct?
That's correct. The DBT Today podcast is started and streaming. And in there, we just talk about some of the skills and strategies we use in DBT and how to use them in real life.
Fantastic. And listeners, I will have all of PJ's contact information in the show notes, just like always. If you're listening from one of our partner stations, head over to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up PJ's episode, and all his contact information, the link to his podcast, everything will be there for you. So, PJ, again, thank you so much for coming on. And listeners, as always, thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk to you in the next show.